My girlfriend and I recently shifted into our new place. It is honestly the place we have been dreaming of, the perfect fit for us. We have a cat named Luna whom we rescued together, so everything felt perfect when we first shifted in. The only downside at first was the place to our right. It gazed deserted as the proprietor had started renovating it but never finished. The layout of the homes is such that on our right there is a space for the entry to our rear yard, and next to that is the deserted place's entry to its rear yard. There is no barrier separating the two as the proprietor taken off it to install a new one but never completed the job, leaving both rear gardens with open access. At the back of the deserted place is another property, divided by a barrier. From what we could see, a handful of younger menfolk lived there. Occasionally, when we returned place, we'd see them cutting through the neighbor's rear yard to reach the front of the road. We never imagined much of it at first. Maybe they knew the proprietor and had permission. Fast forward to our first evening in the new place. We were sitting in the rear yard enjoying the space and gazed up at the homes at the back of us just out of curiosity. That is, when we noticed a man gazing vacantly at us from a window pane. He was not hiding it. He made it very obvious. There was no expression on his face and the room was unlit, which made the whole thing even more unnerving. We assumed he was just nosy about his new neighbors. But after half an hour of that empty-eyed stare, we chose to go inside. The next several days were uneventful. I went to work and my fiancée continued unpacking. One evening, we chose to sit in the yard again. It was unlit, but we enjoyed looking at the constellations and having serious talks until we heard the makeshift wooden board barrier being shifted. 3 menfolk showed up standing there, gazing at us. "Are you okay?" I asked, knowing they wouldn't leave unless I said something. The youngest looking one, around 29, was holding a big bag, and we had no idea what was inside. He offered us some stolen washing up tablets, which we refused. I made a joke about it because the situation felt so uncomfortable. He grinned and said, "Okay." And then they departed. What struck me was how they just let themselves into our yard without saying anything, like as if they had every right to be there. We went rear inside thinking it was a one-off, but it all started getting worse from there. They began helping themselves into our yard more often, and acting in ways that were clearly meant to intimidate us. They would get into the next doorway place by lifting up the barrier that divided the rear gardens and walking through. I forgot to Mention, my girlfriend and I are both 20 years old, so of course the idea that they might be trying to intimidate us as two younger women was the first thing that crossed our minds. One day, while I was cleaning the front room, two officers came around the side of our place and entered the deserted yard. They lifted up the barrier and gazed around for a few minutes before leaving, without saying anything. I thought it was odd, but continued with my day, assuming maybe the people next doorway were trouble. Days later, the officers knocked softly on our doorway. They explained that the place at the back of us was now empty-eyed. The menfolk had been kicked out for antisocial behavior. Apparently, not only toward us, but with other neighbors, too. Honestly, we were relieved. Even though they hadn't physically done anything yet, it meant they wouldn't get the chance to escalate things. We continued settling into the place. But one day while I was in the bath, I heard a loud bang outdoors. I quickly got dressed and ran to find my girlfriend. I found her recording something from our spare bedroom window pane, which faces the yard of the now empty place. I asked what was going on, but she shushed me. After a moment, she explained. A man we had never seen before pointed up at our bedroom window pane. And when she noticed him, he sprinted full speed toward our place. He tried our doorway handle on the way past, then ran rear into the yard, threw the broken barrier up, and started banging on all the windows of the empty place. We called the officers immediately. They came, watched the video, took a statement, and departed. We were shaken. Why would they try our doorway handle and then break into that place? What was he planning? A few nights later, while we were in bed, we heard whistling sound. The kind of whistle menfolk used to harass women. It was 2:16 a.m. We listened quietly and then heard someone rapping on our window pane. Petrified, we checked the cameras, but for reasons unknown, they did not record anything. Whoever it was must have departed shortly after because the noises stopped. We were too afraid to sleep. So, the next day, we went to my mother's and stayed the evening. When we returned the following morning, we noticed our Ring doorbell had been taken off and placed on the floor. The SD card was gone. Someone had clearly come rear and we knew who it was. Who else would do that? We phoned the police again and they told us to keep all the doors and windows locked. The woman on the phone even said that the removal of the security camera could be a sign that they were planning something, which petrified us even more. But at least she was honest. The whistling sound, banging, and attempts to re-enter the place continued. 4 weeks. We made multiple officers reports. They never tried our doorway again, so we hoped it was over. But 3 weeks later, while in bed watching funny clips from our security camera, we checked the live feed. That is when we saw a man outdoors wearing a black mask covering his mouth and nose with his hood up, standing in front of our yard with his arms spread wide like he was imitating Jesus on the cross. He stared up at our bedroom windowpane with his head tilted. We froze. At the time, we had shifted the security camera inside the place, so it did not record. We were so shaken, we did not even think to screen record. He then spoke, but we couldn't hear what he said. Then he turned around, strolled to the opposite side of the road, and just stood motionless there gazing at our place. For about 30 minutes. We called the officers again. They said it was not illegal to stare at someone's property, and brushed aside the whole thing. Even when we told them what he did on our lawn, they departed us feeling as if we were overreacting. We couldn't sleep for days. Any sound outdoors petrified us, even normal ones. Then one evening at 2:52 a.m. we got a notification. I woke my girlfriend and said, "Someone's outdoors." "I know it. Please check the security camera." She did, and there they were. 2 masked menfolk coming from the side of our place, shining flashlights into our windows. One of them, the same man who had been harassing us, was holding what gazed like a crowbar. Why us? What was the point of this? For days on end, he would stand across the road, pointing, waving, or shouting things up at our windowpane. Every time we gazed, he would stare vacantly at us. It was clearly meant to scare us, and it worked. We kept contacting the officers, but they've done very little. The harassment continues. We have got cameras now, and we record everything, but we feel powerless. Just earlier today, he stood motionless outdoors, again, gazing up at us. We got it on video and we are absolutely petrified. But we will update if anything else happens. Before anything else, I'll say I am not crazy. I know how this is going to sound: on edge, unhinged, delusional. But I promise everything I am about to tell you actually happened. It started with a face, or more accurately, faces that all gazed just slightly off. 3 months ago, I ended a relationship with my ex, Mason. We'd been together almost 2 years, and the breakup was long overdue. Mason was not violent or anything. He never hit me, but he was controlling and possessive in that low-key and calculating kind of way. Perhaps the worst kind of way. He'd do things like track when I am on my phone and quiz me on things I'd done that day to see if I'd give the same answer twice. After I departed him, I changed my number, disabled my social media, and even shifted apartments. I thought I was in the clear. Then came the coffee clerk. It was a Tuesday morning. I stopped by this little hole-in-the-wall coffee shop near my new place. I'd only been there once or twice. As I stepped up to the counter, the coffee clerk, a girl about my age, grinned at me. But something about her expression made me pause. She tilted her head and said, "Good morning, sunshine." I froze because that was Mason's nickname for me. It was not a common one. He used to say it sarcastically whenever I was upset. Like, "What's wrong, sunshine?" He enjoyed pushing buttons. I brushed it off. Maybe it was a coincidence. But then it happened again. A few days later, I took a ride share to work. A different chauffeur than usual. Older guy. Maybe in his 50s. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror like he was trying to recognize me, and then he asked me if I ever figured out what I was running from. He said it as casual as could be. I simply responded, "What?" And he just chuckled and shook his head like I was in on some joke. Mason said that to me once after I told him I needed time to figure myself out. He leaned in dead serious and asked, "Ever figure out what you're running from?" Now, two strangers have repeated things he said word for word. It kept happening. A woman at the grocery store bumped into me and whispered, "You don't get to just disappear." A guy on the road said, "Still wearing your hair like that," as he passed. Another one, someone who worked in my block, said, "You always like this song," while humming the exact tune Mason used to play when we argued. It was not their faces that freaked me out. It was the way they gazed at me. Like they knew me, or at least thought they did. They all had different faces, but their eyes all had the same expressions. I started thinking I was going crazy. I mean, what else could explain it? So I did something I was not proud of. I contacted Mason, not directly. I sent a message to his sister. I told her to tell him to stop. I figured maybe he hired a private investigator. Maybe he was stalking me or pulling strings, telling people things about me. I just Wanted it to stop. She texted Rear the next day saying, I don't know what you're talking about. Mason's in rehab. He's been there for 6 weeks with no phone. I did not believe her. I thought she was covering for him. That is until I saw a picture she posted of him on Facebook a week later looking pale and sunken in, holding one of those one-day sober chips. So, it couldn't be Mason. Or at least not directly. I could not shake the feeling that these strangers knew things they shouldn't. Though, one evening, I stayed late at work. I did not want to go place because my flat did not feel safe anymore. Not that anything bad happened inside of it. I just did not like being alone. Around 10 p.m., I finally called it a evening. I strolled the 10 minutes to my place, keeping my head down, headphones in, but no tune playing. Something I learned to do so I could still hear if someone was following me. When I turned the corner onto my block, I saw someone sitting on the stoop of the block across from mine. A younger man with his hoodie up but his head down. I almost ignored him until he spoke. He said, "Cold out tonight, huh, sunshine?" I stopped walking. He did not look at me. He just stared at the sidewalk like he was reading something on it. I slowly strolled past and did not say a word. When I reached my block, I went above and locked every bolt on the doorway. I sat on the couch for hours just listening to nothing. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to find my doormat flipped over. That might not sound like a big deal, but I live alone. And the doorway to my unit is on the top floor. You don't just accidentally walk by my place. The underside of my mat had something scribbled in pen. It said, "You can change your face too if you want, but I'll still recognize you." I did not know what it meant, but I still threw up. That day, I booked in for the weekend. I departed my flat without packing anything. I did not feel safe, even grabbing clothes. I just needed to be somewhere crowded. The inn clerk gave me a room on the 4th floor. It was small, quiet, and kind of stuffy. But it felt safe. But only until around a.m. when someone knocked softly on my doorway. There were 3 slow knocks. I sat up in bed and waited. They knocked softly again eventually. I peeked through the peephole and it was a woman maybe in her 40s. Her face was totally empty-eyed and blank-faced. She was just gazing straight at the doorway. She did not say anything. So, I did not make a sound and eventually she departed. It was one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen. The next morning, I asked the front desk if someone had come by to my room. They said nobody should have been up there, especially that late. All the rooms on my floor were vacant. That is when it clicked. These were not random people. They were being sent and fed my details. They were given phrases Mason used. But if it were not Mason, who would do it and why? I thought about Mason in rehab, about his obsession with control and making sure I was never fully gone. He did not need to be the one knocking. He just needed to send others to do it. So, I started digging, and there was one conversation I remembered from months before the breakup. Mason talking about a forum he was on, a place where people shared tactics. He made it sound like it was for productivity or self-improvement. I don't remember the name of it. Honestly, I don't think he ever gave me the name, but in retrospect, it sounded like some creepy, cultish roleplay crap, except it is happening to me for real. Someone, probably Mason, had hired people to say his words and mimic his patterns so that even if he was out of my life, technically, I'd still be constantly reminded of him. It was not stalking in the traditional sense. It was psychological graffiti, like he was spraying himself onto strangers so I could never be sure who I was looking at. I don't think it is about watching me, but rather about making sure I never stopped watching for him. I shifted again and disappeared off social media again. I even dyed my hair. I told friends not to tell anyone where I was. It worked. Until last week. I was walking place from the bookstore and a woman passed me on the road and said, still hiding at the back of books, sunshine. She did not stop walking even just to look at me. I don't think this will ever stop. Maybe he paid some crazy underground service to do this to me for a year. Who knows? Maybe he made it public. Maybe this is some sick underground game now. Who can scare sunshine the best? Who can get the closest without touching? I cannot trust anyone's face anymore. The constant paranoia is truly eating away at my mental health. My family is a group of place bodies that don't travel, so everyone was surprised when my Aunt Nora proposed a trip to one of Lake Champlain in Vermont. We agreed, wanting to create new memories together. My cousin booked a spacious Airbnb that could somehow accommodate all 18 of us, which felt like a miracle considering the price. The place sat right on the shore with gorgeous lake views that stretched for miles, almost like an ocean. Most of us claimed rooms in the main place, but because of our large group, some of us were placed in a second block directly at the back of it, a two-story outbuilding with bedrooms above. My 3 relatives and I were assigned to sleep there. At first, we never imagined much of it. We spent most of the first day enjoying the hot tub, relaxing on the shore, and soaking in the scenery. It was not until evening that we entered the outbuilding for real. The space was outdated and neglected, with carpeted bathrooms that smelled like mold, stained bed linens, and a poorly secured latch on the doorway. Clearly, the cleaners focused on the main place and ignored the outbuilding. My relatives were grossed out and refused to sleep on the beds unless we washed the sheets, so I suggested we do laundry. The machines were small, so we could only do 1 set of bed sheets at a time. And it was obvious we'd be up late. We passed time above, waiting for the first load. My cousin Layla complained about how we got stuck with the worst place. And as she spoke, I started to feel uneasy, like something bad was coming. I have had this feeling before, a rare kind of intuition that usually ends in a nightmare or something worse. I told my relatives to stay alert, and they listened, especially since we'd all experienced a break-in before when we lived in Boston. Around midnight, the bell rang from the first floor, signaling the wash was done. I went below alone, swapped the load into the dryer, and brought up the clean smelling sheets. When my relatives saw how clean they were, they wanted their bedding washed, too. So, I kept going up and down between cycles doing everyone's sheets. At around 2:37 a.m. we were finally done. We made the beds, and we are too tired to stay up any longer. My cousin Tasha insisted we leave the light on, and while they all fell asleep quickly, I stayed up doing some schoolwork on my phone. I am a light sleeper, something that stuck with me since the break-in, and I remained hyper aware of my surroundings, even while half asleep. Then, around 3 a.m. a loud bang hit the outbuilding doorway like someone had thrown their body against it. I sat up, startled, but my relatives did not move. I tried telling myself it was just wind, though the sound was too heavy for that. Still, I stayed quiet and tried to sleep. But then it happened again. Same deafening crash. This time shaking the outbuilding doorway. The block trembled from the impact. I was fully awake now, watching the lamp-lit room as my relatives continued to sleep. No animal or gust of wind could cause that. 20 minutes later, the third boom hit. The outbuilding shook again, and finally, 2 of my relatives bolted upright. I asked if they heard that, already knowing the answer. Tasha asked what that was, and I said, I don't know, but this is the 3rd time I am hearing it. We all agreed. Not a breath of wind could cause that sound. Tasha suggested texting her mother, my Aunt Nora, so we did. It was 4:11 a.m. when she responded, realizing something serious must be going on. She woke my uncle, who ran outdoors to check the property. We stayed above, too afraid to move, until we heard knocking. It was my uncle at the doorway, and when we opened it, we saw him standing there with my father and a few of our older male relatives. That is when I knew it was serious. There was no wind, nobody playing around. My uncle told us to grab our things that were going to the main place. Then he said there was someone on the property, and that is what made my heart sink. I threw everything into my suitcase, and we all rushed out of the outbuilding. Once inside the main place, most of the family woke up from the sound and commotion. We sat in the living room trying to piece it all together. I told them about the first 2 loud crashes, and my relatives confirmed the 3rd. My Aunt Nora explained that when my uncle went out to investigate, she followed him. He yelled, "Hey," at someone standing at the back of the outbuilding. The doorway to the main place slammed at the back of her right then, and there was not a breath of wind to explain it. She feared someone might have slipped into the place, so she ran to wake my father and relatives. After searching, nobody else was found inside. Then my uncle described what he saw. A man stood motionless at the back of the outbuilding, not hiding or moving, but gazing like he wanted to be seen. When my uncle called out, the man did not flinch. He simply strolled away and vanished. Not into the darkness, but into thin air. The leaves on the ground did not crunch, and there were no steps departed at the back of. My uncle's not someone who makes up stories either. He's a serious, logical man, which made everything scarier. My brothers added that they found 2 jester cards, one in the main place and one in the outbuilding. The one in the outbuilding was twisted and demonic looking. One cousin pointed out that gestures symbolize mockery and loud sounds happened around 3 a.m., the so-called devil's hour. It was as if we were being taunted. My uncle had even checked for footprints, but saw only his and my relatives, not the man's. Another cousin drove down the road during the incident to try and spot someone fleeing, but found nobody. That day, no One returned to the outbuilding. We squeezed into the main place, on floors, couches. Anywhere there was room. My mother gave up her bed so we could sleep more comfortably. On the second evening, she slept on a couch by the large windows and woke around 4 a.m. to steps on the veranda. She did not dare open her eyes. She was afraid of seeing someone looking in. Then she heard someone trying the cellar doorway. It had a weak lock and my brothers and male relatives were sleeping down there. The doorway rattled as someone tried to break in. My mother rushed to the cellar, but by the time she reached the beachside entry, nobody was there. And all the guys were still fast asleep. That was our last evening. Though we planned to stay until Tuesday, we departed Monday instead. On the way place, we couldn't stop talking about what had happened. When my mother found out I had been going below alone during laundry, she theorized that someone might have been watching me and thought I was alone in the outbuilding. The time between my last trip below and us going to sleep lined up way too well with the banging sounds. Theories started to form. Some of us thought it was a neighbor trying to scare us off. Others believed there was something paranormal, especially because of the jester cards. My Aunt Nora pointed out that a normal person would have run when my uncle spotted them. But this man did not run. He just watched and disappeared. We contacted the Airbnb host, who claimed she'd review the footage from the security camera above the outbuilding doorway, but we never heard rear. It made us wonder, did she know the man? Was he a neighbor? When we first arrived, my sister and cousin had strolled the shore and passed a woman next doorway. She watched them coldly without friendliness or a greeting, just an unfriendly gaze. The place was in the middle of nowhere, and we understood how constant Airbnb guests might annoy locals, but we were respectful. We did not deserve what happened. This was our first family trip, and hopefully not our last. Even after everything we went through. If you love chilling horror stories and eerie mysteries, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us every week for a new descent into darkness. Your next nightmare is just one click away.